6 voicemails from my panicked family waited on my phone while I sat in my new corner office 3,000 miles away. My parents' voices cracked with desperation, my sister Amanda sobbing about bankruptcy, my brother Jake begging me to come home. But what they don't know is that I'm not just successful, I'm the silent partner who's been funding their entire lives for years. The same family who called me selfish and heartless for refusing to give Amanda my life savings now needs me more than ever, completely unaware of the shocking truth. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, I learned early that being the middle child meant being invisible. My parents, Robert and Susan, poured their attention into Amanda, my younger sister, who painted watercolor sunsets and dreamed of artistic glory. Jake, my older brother, commanded respect as a star quarterback who could throw a football 60 yards downfield. Then there was me, Mildred, the practical one who should always sacrifice for family harmony. While Amanda received private art lessons every Saturday, I worked weekends at the local grocery store scanning barcodes and bagging produce. My parents explained that Amanda's creativity needed nurturing, but my academic success came naturally and required no investment. When Jake needed new cleats for football season, they appeared instantly. When I needed a graphing calculator for advanced mathematics, I saved for 3 months from my grocery store wages. The pattern continued through high school. Amanda's bedroom walls displayed her latest paintings, carefully framed and lit with special bulbs that Robert installed himself. Jake's trophy collection filled an entire bookshelf in the living room, each golden figure polished weekly by Susan. My academic awards went into a shoebox under my bed because wall space was reserved for more important achievements. Despite this treatment, I earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University for Business Administration. My parents celebrated by taking Amanda shopping for art supplies to commemorate my success. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I'd learned to swallow disappointment like bitter medicine. College changed everything. Away from family dynamics, I discovered my natural talent for strategic thinking and financial planning. Professors praised my analytical mind, and internships led to job offers before graduation. By 23, I'd moved to Portland, Oregon, and launched a consulting firm specializing in small business recovery. Success came quickly. Within 2 years, my client list included restaurants, retail shops, and tech startups across the Pacific Northwest. My bank account grew substantially, but something else grew too. Guilt about my family's financial struggles. Despite their treatment of me, I loved them deeply and couldn't watch them flounder. So I began helping secretly. Through carefully constructed business transactions, I funneled money home. A fake consulting contract here, an inflated service fee there. My parents never questioned the mysterious payments that appeared during tight months. Jake received funding for his personal training certification through what appeared to be a grant. Amanda's art studio rent was covered by an anonymous benefactor who never revealed their identity. For 5 years, I operated as their guardian angel while maintaining the facade that I was just getting by in expensive Portland. They continued viewing me as the selfish daughter who'd abandoned her roots for personal gain. The contradiction ate at me daily, but I couldn't bear revealing the truth and dealing with their shame or false gratitude. Then, Amanda announced her grand business plan. Desert Blooms would revolutionize the artisanal soap industry, she proclaimed during our monthly family video call. Her eyes sparkled with entrepreneurial fever as she described handcrafted bars infused with Arizona desert botanicals. The concept needed $50,000 in startup capital immediately, or she'd lose the perfect retail space she'd found in Scottsdale. The family intervention happened 3 days later. Jake called it, Susan organized it, and Robert demanded my participation. Their faces filled my laptop screen with expressions ranging from determined to disappointed. Amanda sat in the center, tears streaming down her cheeks as she explained how this opportunity would change everything. Mildred, My mother began, her voice carrying that familiar tone of moral authority. Amanda has worked incredibly hard for this chance. She's not asking for charity. This is an investment in family. Jake leaned forward, his linebacker frame intimidating even through video. Come on, Mill. You're doing well up there in Portland. 50,000 is nothing compared to what Amanda's dreams are worth. I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. The same sensation I'd experienced countless times when asked to sacrifice for family unity. But this time felt different. Heavier. More demanding. I understand this is important, I said carefully, choosing each word like stepping stones across a rushing river. But $50,000 is my entire emergency fund. It represents years of careful saving. The temperature in the virtual room dropped instantly. Emergency fund. Amanda's voice cracked with disbelief. What about my emergency? What about my dreams that are dying because my own sister won't help? Robert's face reddened as he pointed toward the camera. We didn't raise you to be this selfish, Mildred. When family needs help, you help. Period. The accusations came faster then. Selfish, heartless, cold, ungrateful. They painted me as someone who'd forgotten her values, who'd let success corrupt her compassion. Each word landed like a physical blow, but I remained silent, watching their faces contort with disappointment and anger. Susan delivered the final crushing statement. Sometimes I wonder if we raised you wrong, Mildred. A real sister would never let her family down like this. A real daughter would put family first. The words hung in the digital space between us like poison gas. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. People I'd been secretly supporting for years while they labeled me selfish and uncaring. I need time to think about this, I said quietly, my voice barely audible above the sound of my own pulse. Think about what Jake demanded. Either you care about family or you don't. Either you're willing to help or you're not. What's to think about? Amanda sobbed louder. I can't believe this is even a question. I would give everything for any of you without hesitation. The weight of their expectations pressed down on me like a physical force. Years of being misunderstood, undervalued, and taken for granted crystallized into a single moment of clarity. I looked at each face on my screen, faces that showed disappointment, but no understanding, demand, but no appreciation, anger, but no love. Without another word, I closed my laptop. The messages started immediately. My phone buzzed with text after text, each one more accusatory than the last. Jake sent a photo of Amanda crying in her car with the caption, "Look what you did." Susan wrote a lengthy paragraph about family obligations and Christian values. Robert's message was shorter but sharper. Very disappointed in the woman you've become. Amanda's texts were the most painful. She alternated between pleading and attacking sometimes within the same message. Please reconsider, I'm begging you, followed immediately by, I guess money means more to you than family. Each notification made my chest tighten with a mixture of guilt and growing resentment. The harassment escalated throughout the week. Jake called my work number during an important client meeting, forcing me to excuse myself while he yelled about family loyalty loud enough for my colleagues to hear. The embarrassment burned my cheeks as I returned to the conference room, pretending nothing had happened while 3 potential clients studied my face with curious concern. Amanda took her campaign public, posting passive-aggressive messages on social media about fake family members who abandon you when you need them most. Her friends responded with heart emojis and supportive comments about how terrible it was when people changed for the worse. My name wasn't mentioned, but anyone who knew our family understood the target. Susan called crying every night, explaining how worried she was about Amanda's emotional state. She's not eating, my mother sobbed into the phone. She just sits in her room staring at those business plans. You could fix this, Mildred. You have the power to make your sister happy again, but you're choosing not to. The guilt consumed me during sleepless nights, but something else was happening too. Questions were forming in my mind, uncomfortable questions about patterns I'd never examined closely. Why was I always the one expected to sacrifice? Why did my success obligate me to fund their dreams? When had I ever asked them for anything remotely comparable? Curiosity led me to my computer at 2 in the morning, pulling up bank statements and transaction histories. The numbers told a story I'd never fully calculated. In the past 3 years alone, I'd sent my parents $18,000 to cover mortgage shortfalls. Jake had received $12,000 for his certification program and subsequent equipment purchases. Amanda's studio rent, paid through a shell company I'd created, totaled $24,000 annually. The total figure made my breath catch in my throat. Over 5 years, I'd secretly contributed $207,000 to my family's well-being, money they'd accepted without question, while simultaneously criticizing my supposed selfishness. But the real shock came when I dug deeper into my parents' finances. Something wasn't adding up. The mortgage payments I'd been covering should have kept them current, yet I was receiving past due notices forwarded to my accountant. Property tax records showed liens that shouldn't exist if my payments were being applied correctly. A call to their mortgage company revealed the devastating truth. My parents were 4 months behind despite my regular contributions. The money I'd been sending to keep them afloat was disappearing somewhere else entirely. 24 hours of careful investigation uncovered the ugly reality. Bank statements I obtained through a private investigator showed regular charges to Desert Diamond Casino amounts, ranging from $500 to $2,000 multiple times per month. My parents had developed a gambling addiction, systematically destroying every penny I sent while maintaining the illusion of financial responsibility. The cruelest irony hit me like a physical blow. On the same day my mother called me selfish for refusing to fund Amanda's dreams, she'd lost $800 at slot machines using money I'd secretly provided to keep their house. While Jake lectured me about family loyalty, he was spending borrowed cash on expensive dinners and entertainment, knowing unemployment benefits couldn't cover his lifestyle. I sat in my Portland apartment surrounded by evidence of my family's deception and felt something shift permanently in my chest. The guilt that had tormented me for weeks transformed into something harder and cleaner resolve. They needed $50,000, but not for Amanda's soap business. They needed it to cover gambling debts, unpaid loans, and the consequences of financial irresponsibility they'd hidden behind stories of artistic dreams and entrepreneurial vision. My phone buzzed with another message from Susan. "Your father couldn't sleep last night thinking about how disappointed he is in you. We raised you better than this." The words that once would have made me question everything now seemed absurd. They were disappointed in me. They were worried about their values while living off my secret charity and gambling away my support. I walked to my bathroom mirror and stared at my reflection. 38 years old, successful, compassionate, and tired. Tired of being the family scapegoat. Tired of funding their dysfunction while being labeled selfish. Tired of loving people who took my love for granted while treating me as their personal bank account. The woman looking back at me deserved better. She deserved a family who appreciated her sacrifices instead of demanding more. She deserved respect instead of guilt trips. She deserved to build a life without carrying the weight of other people's poor choices. My phone rang again. Amanda's name appeared on the screen, with another tearful plea undoubtedly waiting. But this time, I didn't answer. Instead, I powered off the device and sat in blessed silence for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow, I would begin making changes. Real changes that would force my family to confront the truth about themselves and about me. But tonight, I simply sat with the revolutionary idea that maybe I didn't owe them anything at all. The liberation felt terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Monday morning brought clarity like sunshine after a thunderstorm. I contacted Peterson Investigations, a discreet firm specializing in financial forensics, and requested a comprehensive background check on my immediate family members. The fee was substantial, but I needed facts before making life-changing decisions. Within 72 hours, the report arrived via encrypted email. The contents exceeded my worst fears. Jake hadn't just received unemployment benefits, he'd been collecting them fraudulently for 6 months while working under-the-table construction jobs. Amanda's soap business was entirely fictional. She'd been purchasing wholesale products online and repackaging them as handmade artisanal goods. The $50,000 wasn't for startup costs, but for covering credit card debt accumulated during casino trips to Las Vegas. My parents' gambling addiction was worse than I'd suspected. Bank records showed they'd lost over $30,000 in the past year, a loan money that should have covered their living expenses comfortably. The mysterious mortgage payments I'd been making were being diverted immediately to cover minimum credit card payments, keeping their gambling habit funded while their house slipped toward foreclosure. The most devastating revelation came buried in the appendix. Amanda had been telling everyone in Phoenix that I was wealthy and heartless, painting herself as the victim of a cruel sister who'd abandoned family values for money. She'd actually started a GoFundMe campaign titled "Help My Sister's Dream Survive Family Betrayal," complete with tearful videos about how her successful sibling refused to invest in local business. The campaign description made my hands shake with rage. My sister moved away and forgot where she came from. She makes 6 figures in Portland but won't help her own family achieve their dreams. Any support would mean the world as I try to build something beautiful in our hometown. $8,047 had been raised from their community. Neighbors I'd grown up with, teachers who'd encouraged my education, family friends who'd attended my high school graduation, all contributing money while reading comments about what a terrible person I'd become. Mrs. Rodriguez, my old math teacher, had donated $50 with a note. "So sorry your sister turned out this way, honey. Follow your dreams anyway." Mr. Peterson from the hardware store contributed $25, adding, "Some people get too big for their britches. Don't let family disappointment stop you." The betrayal cut deeper than any financial deception. Amanda had systematically destroyed my reputation in our hometown while accepting my secret support. She'd weaponized our community's love for local success stories, turning them against the very person who'd been funding her lifestyle. I printed every page of the investigation report and spread them across my dining room table like evidence in a courtroom. Bank transfers receipts, social media screenshots, witness statements, a complete picture of my family's dysfunction and my unwitting role as enabler. The hardest part wasn't the money they'd wasted or even the lies they'd told. The hardest part was realizing that my love had made their dysfunction possible. Every secret payment had removed consequences for their poor choices. Every anonymous gift had prevented them from learning financial responsibility. My compassion had become their drug, keeping them dependent, while they resented the very person keeping them afloat. Change required courage I wasn't sure I possessed, but sitting in that dining room surrounded by evidence of their manipulation, I found strength in anger, clean, justified anger that demanded action. Step 1, I logged into my business accounts and canceled every automatic transfer, every recurring payment, every mysterious subsidy I'd been providing. The shell companies that had funneled money to Amanda's studio rent were dissolved. The fake consulting contracts that had supplemented my parents' income were terminated. The grant program that had funded Jake's certification was permanently closed. Step 2, I changed my phone number and email address, updating only my business contacts and closest friends. My family would no longer have direct access to guilt-trip me into submission. Step 3, I contacted a real estate agent about selling my Portland apartment. It was time for a complete fresh start somewhere my past couldn't follow. The apartment showed beautifully. Within 2 weeks, I had multiple offers above asking price. Portland's housing market was booming, and my downtown condo with mountain views attracted serious buyers immediately. I accepted an all-cash offer that would close in 30 days. While buyers arranged inspections and financing, I researched opportunities in Seattle. A former colleague had mentioned an opening at Morrison Strategic, a prestigious consulting firm specializing in corporate turnarounds. The position offered everything I wanted: challenging work, excellent compensation, and most importantly, distance from my past. The interview process was rigorous but exhilarating. After years of running my own small firm, the prospect of joining a larger organization with unlimited resources felt refreshing. Morrison's senior partners were impressed by my track record and offered the position with a 20% salary increase and full relocation assistance. I accepted immediately. 3 weeks later, professional movers packed my belongings while I supervised with a mixture of excitement and sadness. Portland had been good to me, but it was also where I'd learned to enable my family's dysfunction. Seattle represented possibility, a chance to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. The night before my move, I performed one final task. I gathered copies of every bank statement, every transfer record, every piece of evidence showing my secret support over the past 5 years. The total came to $257,000 in direct financial assistance, not including gifts, travel expenses, and various other contributions. I packaged everything in a manila envelope addressed to my parents' house. Inside, I included a handwritten note. "This is what your selfish daughter sacrificed for you while you called her heartless. Don't look for me." The envelope went into overnight mail with signature confirmation required. By the time they received it, I'd be halfway to Seattle with a new phone number, new address, and new determination to build a life free from manipulation. My family had taught me that love without boundaries becomes enabling. They'd shown me that sacrifice without appreciation becomes resentment. Most importantly, they'd proven that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. The moving truck pulled away from my building at sunrise, carrying everything I owned toward an unknown future. But for the first time in years, unknown felt like freedom rather than fear. Seattle welcomed me with overcast skies and the smell of coffee beans roasting in Pike Place Market. Morrison Strategic had arranged temporary housing in a furnished apartment near their downtown offices, giving me time to explore neighborhoods and find permanent accommodations. The transition was smoother than expected. My new colleagues were brilliant professionals who valued competence over personal drama. Nobody asked probing questions about my family or why I'd relocated so suddenly. They were focused on the work-complex business challenges that required analytical thinking and creative solutions. Within my first week, I was assigned to help a struggling restaurant chain optimize their operations. The project demanded complete attention, leaving no mental space for guilt about my vanished family. Days began at 6 a.m. and ended after dark, filled with financial modeling, operational assessments, and strategic planning sessions. My phone remained blissfully quiet. The new number was known only to Morrison Strategic, my realtor, and 2 close friends from Portland who understood my need for privacy. No guilt-inducing texts interrupted my concentration. No manipulative voicemails waited when I returned to my apartment each evening. The silence felt strange at first. For years, family drama had been the background noise of my life, constant emotional static that drained my energy even when I tried to ignore it. Without that distraction, my mind felt clearer and more focused than it had in decades. But change was happening back in Phoenix, whether I knew it or not. The first crisis hit when my parents' automatic mortgage payment bounced on the 15th of the month. Susan called the bank in tears, explaining that their business account had been emptied by hackers, their latest excuse for financial shortfalls. The customer service representative politely explained that they'd already received 3 similar excuses this year and were initiating foreclosure proceedings. Jake discovered his unemployment benefits had been suspended pending investigation into unreported income. Someone had filed an anonymous tip about his under-the-table construction work, complete with photographs and payroll documentation. His panicked calls to my old number reached a recorded message stating the number was no longer in service. Amanda's studio rent came due with no mysterious payment appearing to cover the cost. When she called the anonymous benefactor's phone number, she reached a disconnected line. Her landlord, sympathetic but businesslike, explained that the studio would need to be vacated within 30 days unless full payment was received. The family's confusion turned to panic as they realized their safety net had disappeared. They tried reaching me through every possible channel, old email addresses, work contacts, mutual friends, but found only dead ends and polite responses that I'd moved without leaving forwarding information. Susan spent hours searching social media for any trace of my new location. My accounts had been deactivated or set to private, revealing nothing about my current activities. Jake drove to Portland and sweet-talked my old building's concierge into confirming that I'd moved out completely, but the man had no knowledge of my destination. Their investigation became increasingly desperate. Amanda called every hotel in Portland, claiming to be my sister with a family emergency, hoping to find where I might be staying temporarily. She contacted Arizona State University's Alumni Association, Oregon business licensing agencies, and even the Portland Police Department, with fabricated stories about needing to reach me urgently. Meanwhile, I was building a new life with methodical precision. Seattle's real estate market offered opportunities Portland couldn't match: a corner unit in a modern high-rise with panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. The apartment was twice the size of my Portland place, but cost less thanks to Washington's lack of state income tax. I furnished the space, carefully choosing pieces that reflected my personality rather than accommodating imaginary family visits. A home office overlooked the water, perfect for the consulting work I occasionally took on weekends. The kitchen was designed for elaborate cooking projects, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago when family drama consumed my free time. Morrison Strategic recognized my abilities quickly. Within 2 months, I was leading my own projects and mentoring junior consultants. The restaurant chain I'd helped restructure was showing improved profits and had requested my firm's assistance with expansion planning. My reputation was growing based purely on professional merit, not family obligation or guilt-driven sacrifice. The transformation felt profound. Without the constant drain of family manipulation, my creativity and confidence flourished. Colleagues sought my input on challenging projects. Senior partners included me in strategic planning sessions, typically reserved for more senior staff. I was becoming the person I'd always been capable of being, freed from the role of family ATM and emotional punching bag. 3 months into my new life, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired the same private investigation firm I'd used in Portland to monitor my family's situation from a distance, not because I planned to help, those days were over, but because I needed to understand the full consequences of my departure. The investigators' reports arrived monthly, documenting the chaos I'd left behind. My parents had been forced to take second mortgages to avoid foreclosure. Jake was working legitimate jobs for the first time in years, struggling to rebuild his credit rating. Amanda had moved back in with our parents after losing her studio, her soap business dreams, replaced by a part-time job at a local craft store. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. The investigator included copies of a package delivered to my parents' house, the envelope I'd sent with evidence of my financial support. According to his report, my family had spent an entire evening going through every document, every bank transfer, every proof of the support they'd never known they were receiving. Robert had been seen crying on the front porch the following morning, holding my handwritten note and staring at the street as if expecting me to appear. Susan had called in sick to work for 3 consecutive days, telling neighbors she needed time to process some devastating family news. Jake had reportedly driven to several of Amanda's friends' houses, apologizing for things they didn't understand. The most significant change involved Amanda herself. She'd shut down the GoFundMe campaign and issued a public Facebook post apologizing for misleading their community. The post admitted that she'd been wrong about my character and asked people to stop donating money based on false information. "I made terrible mistakes," her post read. "My sister isn't the person I described. I was angry and hurt, but that doesn't excuse spreading lies. If you donated to my campaign, please request a refund. I need to figure out how to rebuild my life honestly." The community's response was mixed. Some people expressed sympathy and forgiveness, while others felt betrayed by Amanda's deception. The local newspaper had even picked up the story, running a feature about the dangers of online fundraising without proper verification. Reading these updates in my Seattle apartment surrounded by evidence of my successful new life, I felt something unexpected, not satisfaction or vindication, but a deep sadness for the relationships that should have been possible but never were. My family was finally learning the lessons I'd tried to teach through years of patient enabling, but they were learning them too late after their behavior had pushed away the very person who loved them most. The irony was complete. In trying to force me to fund their dreams, they'd lost the person who'd been funding their lives all along. In calling me selfish, they'd driven away their most generous supporter. In demanding my sacrifice, they'd sacrificed our relationship itself. Seattle's skyline glittered outside my windows as I closed the investigation report and filed it away. My family was 3 states and a lifetime behind me now, learning hard truths that would shape their future and mine. Winter arrived early in Phoenix that year, bringing unusually cold temperatures and the harsh reality of financial consequences. Within 6 weeks of my disappearance, my family's carefully constructed house of cards began collapsing with devastating speed. Robert and Susan received official foreclosure proceedings on December 3rd, exactly 90 days after their final missed mortgage payment. The legal documents delivered by a somber-faced process server gave them 30 days to pay $17,000 in past due amounts or lose their home of 22 years. The house represented more than shelter. It was the repository of family memories, holiday celebrations, graduation parties, and birthday gatherings. Every room held reminders of happier times when money problems seemed manageable and family bonds felt unbreakable. Now it would belong to the bank unless they could produce more cash than they'd possessed collectively in years. Jake's unemployment investigation concluded with devastating results. The state of Arizona demanded immediate repayment of $14,000 in fraudulent benefits plus penalties and interest, bringing the total to nearly $20,000. His construction skills were solid but legitimate. Employers required background checks that revealed his recent legal troubles. The jobs he could find paid minimum wage and offered no benefits, barely covering his basic living expenses. Amanda's financial situation was equally dire. Without her studio space, she had nowhere to create or store inventory for her soap business. The craft store job paid $9 per hour for 25 hours per week, enough for gas money and basic necessities, but nothing approaching financial independence. At 25 years old, she found herself sleeping in her childhood bedroom, while her former classmates were buying houses and starting careers. The family's attempts to locate me had exhausted their remaining resources. Jake's trip to Portland cost $800 they couldn't afford. Phone calls to every business in Seattle's consulting industry consumed hours and yielded nothing. Private investigators demanded retainer fees they couldn't pay. Susan's health began deteriorating under the stress. She developed chronic headaches that required expensive medications, not covered by their reduced insurance plan. Sleep became elusive as she lay awake calculating bills that exceeded their income by thousands each month. Her supervisor at the dental office where she worked part-time noticed the decline in her performance and reduced her hours accordingly. But the true breaking point came during Thanksgiving week when the community learned about Amanda's deceptive fundraising campaign. Word spread quickly through Phoenix's interconnected neighborhoods about the family who'd accepted charity while hiding their real financial problems. Mrs. Martinez, who'd contributed $100 to Amanda's GoFundMe, confronted Susan at the grocery store with quiet fury. "I gave money I needed for my own grandchildren because I believed your daughter was the victim of family betrayal. Now I discover she was lying about everything." The confrontation attracted attention from other shoppers who recognized the family name. Whispers followed Susan through every aisle as she tried to complete her shopping with dignity intact. The embarrassment was suffocating, made worse by her knowledge that every criticism was deserved. Local business owners who'd supported Amanda's supposed entrepreneurial dreams felt particularly betrayed. Mr. Chen, who owned the art supply store where Amanda had shopped for years, had waived payment for materials worth $300 based on her story about family hardship. When he learned about her deception, he demanded immediate repayment and banned her from the store permanently. The social isolation became unbearable. Neighbors who'd been friends for decades now crossed the street to avoid conversations. Church members whispered during services about the family's dishonesty. Amanda's former supporters left angry comments on her social media accounts, calling her manipulative and ungrateful. Jake tried to defend his family's honor by working harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He took construction jobs during the day and stocked shelves at a warehouse every evening, sending every spare dollar to help with household expenses. His hands developed permanent calluses and his back ached constantly, but he pushed through the pain with a determination to prove his worth. The physical exhaustion was nothing compared to his emotional turmoil. Late at night, when his parents thought he was asleep, Jake would lie in bed remembering conversations with me, times when he'd dismissed my achievements, moments when he'd demanded financial support, occasions when he'd called me selfish for not sacrificing more. The memories were excruciating because they revealed patterns he'd refused to see. I'd been the family's foundation for years, providing stability while they pursued dreams and made poor decisions. Instead of appreciating my support, they'd taken it for granted and demanded even more. Amanda's transformation was the most dramatic. The confident young woman who'd once lectured others about following their passions now worked silently among craft supplies, serving customers who sometimes recognized her as that girl who lied about her sister. The humiliation was educational in ways no amount of parental guidance had ever been. She began researching business planning and financial management, during her breaks at the craft store reading articles about legitimate entrepreneurship versus wishful thinking. The soap business idea that had seemed so brilliant months earlier now appeared naive and poorly researched. She'd never calculated startup costs, accurately researched market competition, or developed realistic revenue projections. The hardest lesson involved accepting responsibility for her choices rather than blaming others for their consequences. Years of portraying herself as a victim of family circumstances had prevented her from developing real problem-solving skills or personal accountability. Now facing genuine hardship, she was forced to grow up quickly. Robert's pride suffered the most devastating blow. At 62 years old, he'd built an identity around being the family provider and decision-maker. The revelation that his daughter had been secretly supporting their household for years while he gambled away their security made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. He took a night shift position at a 24-hour shipping facility, loading trucks and scanning packages for $8 per hour. His back protested the physical labor, and his eyes burned under fluorescent lights, but the work represented penance for his failures. Every aching muscle reminded him of mistakes that had cost his family their relationships and their home. The job also provided time for reflection during long, quiet hours. Robert began understanding how his gambling addiction had twisted his perception of reality. The excitement of potential winnings had made him rationalize increasingly dangerous financial decisions. He'd convinced himself that one big win would solve all their problems while systematically destroying their foundation. The crisis reached its peak when Susan collapsed at work from stress-induced exhaustion. Paramedics rushed her to the emergency room where doctors discovered dangerously elevated blood pressure and signs of cardiac strain. The medical bills from her overnight stay added another $3,000 to their insurmountable debt pile. Lying in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines monitoring her vital signs, Susan experienced a moment of devastating clarity. She realized that their family's destruction hadn't been caused by outside forces or bad luck. It had been caused by their treatment of the person who loved them most. I had been their guardian angel for years, protecting them from consequences while they criticized my character. I had sacrificed my own security to maintain theirs, while they labeled me selfish and ungrateful. I had given them everything they'd needed to succeed, while they demanded even more. Now they were paying the price for their ingratitude learning lessons that should have been learned years earlier. The daughter they'd driven away had been their salvation, and they destroyed that relationship through greed, manipulation, and emotional abuse. As Susan stared at the hospital room ceiling, listening to machines beep steadily beside her bed, she understood that their family's healing would require more than financial recovery. It would require fundamental changes in how they treated each other, changes that might come too late to repair the damage they'd inflicted on the person who deserved their love most. The manila envelope that arrived on a gray December morning contained more than financial documents. It contained the truth that would forever change how my family understood themselves and their treatment of me. Robert signed for the package with hands that trembled slightly from his new medication for high blood pressure, unaware that he was accepting evidence of their profound failure as human beings. Susan opened the envelope while sitting at their kitchen table, the same table where they'd held their intervention, demanding I fund Amanda's dreams. The first document was a bank statement showing a transfer of $1,500 to their mortgage company dated 3 years earlier. The notation read, "Anonymous business consulting fee payment." Her breath caught as recognition dawned. The mysterious payments that had kept them afloat during difficult months weren't from unknown sources. They were from their daughter, who lived 3 states away, working quietly to preserve their home while they complained about her supposed selfishness. Document after document told the same story. Studio rent payments listed as contractor fees. Jake's certification program funded through a small business development grant. Art supplies purchased via consulting expense reimbursements. Every mysterious financial reprieve they'd received over 5 years had originated from the same source, me. Amanda found her parents sitting in stunned silence when she returned from her shift at the craft store. The kitchen table was covered with bank statements, transfer receipts, and payment confirmations. The evidence created an undeniable timeline of generosity they'd never recognized, sacrifice they'd never acknowledged, love they'd never appreciated. "This can't be real," Amanda whispered, picking up a receipt for $1,200 in art supplies charged to something called MH Creative Consulting. Her initials, my initials. The connection was unmistakable. Jake arrived an hour later to find his entire family crying around the evidence of their collective blindness. The brother who'd called me heartless was confronted with proof that I'd funded his career development while he struggled with unemployment. The sister who'd labeled me selfish discovered that I'd been paying her rent while she pursued artistic dreams. The parents who'd questioned my values learned that I'd been preserving their home while they gambled away their security. The handwritten note at the bottom of the envelope delivered the final devastating blow. This is what your selfish daughter sacrificed for you while you called her heartless. Don't look for me. Robert read the note aloud, his voice breaking on every word. The phrase, "Don't look for me," felt like a death sentence, final and absolute. They'd spent months searching for their missing daughter, never realizing that their treatment of her had been what needed to be found and changed. The numbers were staggering when Jake calculated the total with his phone's calculator app. $257,000 over 5 years, more than many people earned annually, more than they'd ever asked any family member to contribute, more than they'd ever imagined I possessed or would be willing to share. The cruelest irony was impossible to ignore. While demanding $50,000 for Amanda's fictional business venture, they'd been living off my charity without knowledge or gratitude. While accusing me of forgetting family values, I'd been demonstrating those values through consistent anonymous generosity. While calling me selfish, I'd been sacrificing my own financial security to maintain theirs. Amanda's social media post apologizing for the GoFundMe campaign suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate. She'd lied about my character to hundreds of people, destroyed my reputation in our hometown, and accepted money from neighbors based on fabricated stories about family betrayal. The real betrayal had been theirs, committed against someone who'd been supporting them unconditionally for years. Susan's health crisis took on new meaning in light of these revelations. The stress that had hospitalized her wasn't caused by external circumstances, it was caused by guilt, shame, and the psychological weight of understanding how badly they'd misjudged their daughter. She'd spent weeks crying about losing their home, while that same home had been preserved by payments from the person she'd called ungrateful and selfish. The community's anger about Amanda's deceptive fundraising campaign intensified when word spread about the real family dynamics. Mrs. Rodriguez, the retired teacher who'd contributed $50, felt betrayed not just by Amanda's lies, but by the family's treatment of their clearly generous daughter. She'd taught me mathematics in high school and remembered a studious, kind young woman who deserved better from her relatives. Local business owners who'd supported Amanda's fictional entrepreneurship felt foolish for believing stories about family abandonment. Mr. Peterson from the hardware store had contributed $25 while commenting negatively about my supposed character. Learning that I'd been secretly supporting my family for years made him question his judgment about people and situations he'd thought he understood. The investigation Jake launched into my current whereabouts took on desperate urgency as they realized the magnitude of their loss. He drove to Portland again, this time armed with knowledge about my consulting business and my reputation in the local professional community. Several people remembered me fondly and spoke about my integrity, work ethic, and quiet generosity toward various causes. "She was always helping people," explained Maria Santos, who'd worked with me on a nonprofit restaurant recovery project. "Never wanted credit for it, just wanted to see businesses succeed and people keep their jobs. When she moved away, she didn't just leave Portland, she left a hole in our community assistance network." The testimonials painted a picture of someone who'd been living her values consistently, not just with family, but with her entire community. I'd been the same generous, principled person in Portland that I'd been toward my family, except my Portland friends had appreciated and acknowledged my contributions instead of taking them for granted. Jake's investigation led him to Morrison Strategic in Seattle, but corporate policies prevented the receptionist from confirming my employment. Security protocols protected employee information from family members who might be estranged for legitimate reasons. The irony wasn't lost on Jake. My new workplace was protecting me from the very people I'd been protecting for years. Meanwhile, Amanda began researching legitimate business planning to understand how naive her original soap company proposal had been. Real entrepreneurs conducted market research, calculated startup costs accurately, and developed realistic revenue projections. Her request for $50,000 had been based on wishful thinking rather than business acumen, making my reluctance to fund it seem reasonable rather than selfish. The educational process was humbling. Amanda discovered that successful small businesses typically required 18 months to achieve profitability, even with adequate funding and sound planning. Her expectation of immediate success had been unrealistic, and her anger at my hesitation had been misplaced. I'd probably saved her from losing $50,000 on a venture that was destined to fail. Robert's gambling addiction counselor helped him understand how his problem had affected the entire family's relationship dynamics. The money I'd been sending to support their household had enabled his gambling by removing natural consequences for his addiction. My generosity had inadvertently prevented him from hitting the rock bottom that often motivates people to seek treatment. Addiction makes people rationalize terrible behavior, the counselor explained during a family session. You convinced yourselves that your daughter was selfish, because that narrative justified continuing to take her money while demanding more. Acknowledging her generosity would have forced you to confront your own problems. The psychological insight was devastating because it was accurate. They'd needed me to be the villain in their story to avoid facing their own failures and addictions. My success and generosity had threatened that narrative, so they'd worked to minimize my achievements and maximize my supposed shortcomings. The truth was simpler and more painful than any of them had been willing to acknowledge. I was a good person who'd been treated badly by people who should have loved me unconditionally. Their expectations and demands had been unreasonable. Their criticism had been unwarranted. Their treatment of me had been emotional abuse disguised as family loyalty. Susan found my old bedroom exactly as I'd left it years earlier. She'd preserved it like a shrine without understanding why, perhaps sensing even then that I was someone worth honoring rather than criticizing. Photo albums showed a progression from happy childhood moments to graduation pictures where my smile looked increasingly strained and distant. The pictures told a story of growing emotional isolation within my own family. Holiday gatherings showed me sitting slightly apart from the group. Birthday celebrations captured me serving others rather than being celebrated myself. Graduation photos revealed pride mixed with sadness achievement, shadowed by the knowledge that my success would be minimized and my failure anticipated. I'd been leaving them emotionally long before I left. Physically, Susan realized. Years of being undervalued and taken for granted had created distance that my geographic departure had simply made literal. They lost me gradually, then, suddenly, because they'd never learned to appreciate what they had while they had it. The revelation that would change everything was still coming, but first, they needed to understand completely how much they'd lost and why they'd lost it. The daughter they'd driven away had been their blessing, their supporter, their guardian angel, and they treated her like their obligation, their disappointment, their burden. Now she was gone, and they were finally learning what life looked like without her quiet, constant love sustaining them from the shadows. Spring arrived in Seattle with cherry blossoms and the kind of gentle warmth that made me grateful for my new life every morning. Morrison Strategic had promoted me to senior partner, recognizing achievements that felt purely mine for the first time in years. No family obligations had compromised my focus. No guilt-inducing phone calls had disrupted my concentration. No financial demands had drained my emotional energy. I'd purchased a house in the Wallingford neighborhood, a craftsman-style home with a vegetable garden and enough space for the pottery studio I'd always wanted, but never had time to create. The house represented roots I was choosing rather than obligations imposed upon me. Every room reflected my personality and preferences without accommodation for imaginary family visits or guilt-driven hospitality. My social life had flourished in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Friendships formed naturally around shared interests and mutual respect, rather than family dynamics and emotional manipulation. Colleagues invited me to dinner parties where conversations focused on ideas and experiences rather than complaints and demands. I dated occasionally, meeting people through work or hobbies who appreciated my independence and accomplishments. The monthly reports from Peterson investigations continued arriving, documenting my family's ongoing struggles and gradual transformation. But the latest report contained something different, evidence that they were learning lessons that might actually stick this time. Robert had been attending gambling addiction support groups regularly for 6 months, the longest period of consistent recovery in his adult life. He'd maintained his night shift position at the shipping facility even after finding better-paying day work, using the extra income to pay down debt rather than fund risky entertainment. The structure and accountability of recovery meetings had given him tools for making decisions based on long-term consequences rather than immediate gratification. Susan had joined a support group for families affected by gambling addiction, where she was learning to recognize enabling behaviors and establish healthy boundaries. She'd stopped making excuses for Robert's past choices and started holding him accountable for his recovery progress. The heart palpitations that had hospitalized her were under control through medication and stress management techniques. Jake had completed his second year of legitimate employment and was saving money for the first time since college. He'd moved into his own apartment and was dating someone who worked as a nurse practitioner, a relationship based on mutual support rather than financial dependence. His credit rating had improved enough to qualify for a small business loan he was considering for a personal training studio. Amanda's transformation was the most dramatic. She'd enrolled in business classes at the local community college while continuing her job at the craft store. Her instructor had praised her final project, a realistic business plan for a legitimate soap company that included proper market research, accurate financial projections, and achievable growth targets. The plan required initial funding of $8,000 rather than $50,000, reflecting genuine understanding of small business requirements. But the most significant change was their treatment of each other. The weekly family meetings they'd instituted focused on honest communication and mutual accountability, rather than blame and demands. They'd learned to apologize sincerely, acknowledge mistakes explicitly, and support each other's growth without enabling destructive behaviors. The investigation reports showed they'd stopped trying to locate me after accepting that their behavior had justifiably ended our relationship. Instead of pursuing contact, they hadn't earned. They were focusing on becoming people worthy of potential reconciliation if that opportunity ever arose. Reading these updates in my Seattle garden, surrounded by tomato plants and lavender bushes I'd planted myself, I felt something unexpected curiosity about whether their changes were genuine and sustainable. 6 months later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called the Phoenix number I'd memorized years earlier, knowing they'd changed their phone service due to financial constraints, but hoping the number might still reach them. Robert answered on the second ring with a cautious "hello" that suggested he didn't recognize the calling number. "Dad," I said simply, "it's Mildred." The silence lasted so long I wondered if the connection had failed. Then I heard him calling for Susan and Amanda in a voice thick with emotion. "It's her," he said to someone in the background. "It's our daughter." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. Instead of demands or guilt trips, I heard accountability and remorse. Instead of excuses and rationalizations, I heard ownership of mistakes and acknowledgement of pain they'd caused. Instead of expectations and assumptions, I heard gratitude and respect. "We know we don't deserve to hear from you," Susan said when she took the phone. "We know we destroyed your trust and took advantage of your love. We're not calling to ask for anything. We just want you to know we understand what we did wrong." Amanda's voice shook when she spoke. "I lied about you to our entire community. I painted you as a villain when you were actually supporting all of us. There's no excuse for that, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying to become someone you might be proud to call your sister." Jake's apology was the most difficult to hear because it was the most specific. "I called you selfish while living off your generosity. I demanded your sacrifices while giving nothing in return. I treated your success like it belonged to all of us instead of celebrating your achievements. I'm ashamed of the man I was when you knew me." Their words carried weight because they were accompanied by evidence of change. Robert had maintained sobriety for over a year and was working to pay off debt rather than accumulate more. Susan had become an advocate for gambling addiction awareness in their community, helping other families recognize warning signs they'd ignored. Amanda had started her soap business legitimately funding it through savings from her job rather than demanding family investment. Jake was supporting himself independently while rebuilding relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. But the most meaningful change was their acceptance that reconciliation couldn't be demanded or rushed. They weren't calling to ask me to come home or resume financial support or forgive their past behavior immediately. They were calling to acknowledge wrongdoing and report progress without expecting anything in return. "We hope someday you might want to see us again," Robert said near the end of our call, "but we understand if that day never comes. We just wanted you to know we're trying to become the family you deserved all along." I set conditions for any future relationship that surprised them with their reasonableness. Monthly video calls initially with the possibility of visits if their changes proved sustainable over time. No financial support from me. No requests for money, no assumption that reconciliation meant returning to previous family dynamics. They agreed to everything immediately, apparently grateful for any opportunity to rebuild trust they destroyed. 6 months of monthly calls convinced me that their transformation might be genuine. They asked about my work, my hobbies, my life in Seattle without trying to guilt me into sharing more than I was comfortable revealing. They shared updates about their progress without expecting praise or validation for doing what they should have been doing all along. The first visit happened during Christmas of my second year in Seattle. I flew to Phoenix for 3 days, staying in a hotel, despite their offers to accommodate me at the house. The family I encountered was fundamentally different from the one I'd left behind. Robert had lost 30 pounds and looked healthier than he had in years. He spoke openly about his addiction and the damage it had caused without making excuses or minimizing consequences. He'd framed the letter I'd written about their selfish daughter and kept it on his desk as a daily reminder of mistakes he was determined never to repeat. Susan had become an advocate for family members affected by gambling addiction, speaking at support groups and community meetings about the importance of boundaries and accountability. She no longer enabled Robert's recovery by managing his choices, but supported his sobriety by maintaining her own emotional health. Jake introduced me to his fiancée, a woman who clearly appreciated his character and work ethic rather than expecting financial support. He'd opened his personal training studio and was building a client base through competence and dedication rather than family connections or borrowed money. The business was small but growing sustainably. Amanda's soap company occupied a corner of her bedroom rather than an expensive studio, but her products were genuinely handmade and reasonably priced. She'd learned to create realistic projections and achievable goals rather than expecting immediate success. More importantly, she developed genuine respect for entrepreneurship and the people who support small businesses with their hard-earned money. They'd kept my childhood bedroom exactly as I'd left it, but not as a shrine or guilt trip. They'd preserved it as a reminder that I was always welcome, but never obligated to return. The room felt like an invitation rather than an expectation, a gesture of hope rather than a demand for forgiveness. The most healing moment came during Christmas dinner when Amanda stood to make a toast. "To our sister," she said, raising her glass of sparkling cider, "who loved us enough to support us when we didn't deserve it and who loved us enough to leave when we needed to learn how to support ourselves. The words acknowledged both my sacrifices and my strength, recognizing that walking away had been an act of love rather than abandonment. They understood now that my boundaries had forced them to grow into better people, that my absence had taught them lessons my presence couldn't have provided. I returned to Seattle with cautious optimism about our relationship's future. Time would tell whether their changes would prove sustainable, whether our rebuilt trust would survive inevitable challenges, whether we could create healthy family dynamics we'd never experienced before. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt hopeful about my family relationships, rather than burdened by them. The people who'd once seen my love as obligation now treasured it as a gift. The relatives who'd taken my support for granted now worked to earn my respect. The family who'd called me selfish had learned that love without boundaries becomes enabling, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. My story wasn't unique. Countless people struggle with family members who mistake love for obligation and generosity for entitlement. But my ending offered hope that toxic family dynamics can change when consequences become unavoidable and accountability becomes necessary. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who love us least skillfully. Sometimes walking away teaches lessons that staying never could. Sometimes the family you're born into must learn to become the family you deserve. As I write this from my garden in Seattle 2 years after my disappearance, and 1 year after our reunion, my phone holds 6 voicemails from my family, but these messages contain updates about their successes, invitations to celebrate achievements and expressions of love without conditions attached. The family that once called me selfish for refusing to fund their dreams now calls to thank me for teaching them to fund their own dreams. The people who once demanded my sacrifice now celebrate my independence. The relatives who once took my love for granted now treat it as the precious gift it always was. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who confused love with obligation? Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing we can do, both for ourselves and for the people who need to learn how to love us better. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that their boundaries matter too. Remember, you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, and sometimes the people who love you most need to learn that the hard way. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to prioritize your own well-being while still keeping your heart open to the possibility of healthier relationships in the future.